I never thought a simple favor, staying at my friend's apartment while he was out of town, would turn into a day I couldn't stop replaying. I walked in carrying my duffel bag, tired from a long shift at the repair shop, and already the quiet hum of the place felt off. Too still. I dropped my bag near the door, expecting the usual empty apartment smell, but there was something else, something warm and human lingering in the air. I hadn't even seen her yet. Then she was there, leaning against the kitchen counter like she owned the room, not aggressively, not in a flashy way, but with this quiet certainty that made everything else shrink a little. Her hair was loosely pinned back, a few strands falling around her face, and the way she moved, it wasn't practiced, but it was deliberate. I didn't even know her name yet, and already I felt the weight of noticing her. "I didn't expect anyone today," she said, her voice low and easy, not exactly a greeting, but not dismissive either. She glanced at me with that quick, assessing look people use when they're trying not to give themselves away. There was a flicker, maybe curiosity, maybe something else, but she didn't linger on it. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, just thought I'd crash here for a few days while Mark's out." She tilted her head slightly, studying me without asking questions. Then she smiled. Not a full smile, more like the corners of her mouth teasing a secret. "Well, make yourself at home," she said, and for some reason, the air between us felt electric. I went to put my bag down again, and she reached past me, brushing her hand against mine to grab a kitchen towel. The touch was brief, inconsequential, and yet I froze for a fraction of a second longer than I should have. She didn't notice. Maybe she did. Maybe she knew exactly the effect she had. I couldn't tell, and the not knowing made the tension heavier. We stood there for a moment, both silent, both aware of something that wasn't there yet, but could be. She sipped her coffee, eyes on the counter, and I found myself studying her the same way, trying to figure out how someone could seem so familiar and foreign at the same time. "Need a hand with that?" I asked, gesturing to a stack of dishes. She shook her head, brushing her hair behind her ear. "No, I've got it. But thanks." Her tone was casual, but the way she lingered a second too long on the last word made it feel like an invitation, though to what, I didn't know. I wandered into the living room, and when I glanced back, she was watching me, though I tried to convince myself she wasn't. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a tiny tension in the line of her shoulders, something about her that made it impossible not to notice. And then she smiled again, just a hint, just for a fraction of a heartbeat, before she turned away to finish what she was doing. I sat down on the couch, running a hand over my face, trying to shake the small, persistent ache in my chest. I had no right to feel this way. I didn't even know her, but I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me, the brush of her hand, the pause in the air between us that lasted long enough to be dangerous. And when I closed my eyes that night, the last thing I pictured wasn't the apartment, wasn't even the couch, but her, standing there, almost careless, almost aloof, and yet completely unforgettable. I couldn't stop thinking about that one glance. The next day, I found myself back in the kitchen, trying to make sense of why I'd agreed to help her carrying groceries. The sun was falling through the blinds in slanted stripes, dust motes floating lazily in the golden light. She moved around the room with that same quiet confidence, but now there was a hint of something else, fatigue maybe, or worry, but it softened her edges in a way that made her human, vulnerable. I handed her a bag of vegetables, and she barely glanced at me, but I noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she set it down. I cleared my throat. "You okay?" She hesitated, fingers brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah, just a long morning." She didn't explain, and I didn't push. I learned quickly that pushing her felt wrong, like disturbing some delicate balance she'd built around herself. As we worked side by side, I caught myself noticing the small things. The way her fingers lingered on the edge of the counter before she picked up a bag. The soft exhale she let out when she leaned over to reach the top shelf. Even the way her laugh, quick, almost swallowed, broke through when she realized I'd dropped a can. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that she didn't need to hide anything from me, but I held my tongue. At one point, she paused mid-motion, shoulders slumped slightly, eyes on the floor. I didn't know if she wanted me to ask or if she just needed a moment. I waited, trying not to stare, but I could feel the gentle pull, something in her presence that made it impossible not to notice her. She lifted her gaze just enough to meet mine, then quickly looked away, a flicker of embarrassment, or maybe regret, crossing her face. "You're really good at this," I said, nodding toward her careful organization of the shelves. Not that she needed praise, but somehow it felt like the right thing to say. She gave a soft, almost reluctant smile, her eyes still a little guarded. Time stretched in those moments. The apartment felt smaller, warmer, like the world had narrowed down to the space between us. I wanted to reach out, to say something more, but I couldn't. Not yet. There was something unspoken, hovering, delicate and dangerous in its quietness. When she finally moved to the fridge, I noticed how her back curved slightly under the weight of the groceries, and I felt that familiar tug I hadn't been able to shake since yesterday. I wanted to do something, anything, but instead, I just handed her another bag and let my fingers brush hers for the briefest second. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away, but she didn't look at me either. Then she laughed softly at something in the fridge, a warm, low sound that made my chest tighten, and for a split second, the world felt suspended between us. Just a few seconds of light, shadow, and quiet energy that neither of us spoke about, but both of us felt. I stepped back to give her space, heart racing, knowing that even this small moment, this fleeting, quiet connection, would follow me long after I left the room. And somehow, I already couldn't stop thinking about the next time we'd be this close. It was late. The sky outside slashed with sudden streaks of lightning, rain drumming against the windows like it was trying to get inside. I'd been helping her organize a pile of old books she'd meant to donate months ago. The apartment smelled faintly of damp cardboard and coffee, and the dim lamplight cast long, hesitant shadows across the room. She crouched to pick up a stack of novels, and I realized how close I was standing. Too close. I could see the curve of her neck, the small lines at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the way her hair fell in loose strands despite her careful attempts to keep it pinned back. For a heartbeat, I imagined reaching out to brush one strand away, but didn't. "You don't have to do this alone," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She froze, mid-movement, fingers brushing against the spines of the books. Her eyes flicked up to me, wary, almost startled, but not defensive. "I know," she said, soft, almost a whisper. Then she shook her head slightly and kept working, faster now, like she wanted to outrun the pause between us. I wanted to say more, say how strange it felt to be this near her, how something in her presence made my chest tighten, but I didn't. I stayed still, letting the tension stretch thin across the room. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted, just slightly. A name I didn't recognize flashed across the screen, and I felt a pang of intrusion, but I couldn't look away. She sighed, a long, quiet exhale, and let the call go to voicemail. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I could feel the flicker of vulnerability there, even if she was trying to hide it. Lightning cracked again, briefly illuminating her face. Her hand trembled slightly as she put the phone down, and for a second she looked human in a way that made me ache. Not perfect, not untouchable, just real and fragile and somehow utterly compelling. We resumed sorting the books, side by side, closer than necessary. I caught her hand against mine as we shifted a heavy stack together. Neither of us pulled away, and neither of us commented. It was a fleeting, electric collision, small enough to deny, but large enough to register. My fingers tightened just a fraction, almost involuntarily, and I felt her subtle shift in response. But still, nothing more. Every instinct told me to stay put, to respect the invisible boundary she'd set. But the air between us was charged, a quiet tension that made it impossible to ignore. My mind raced, imagining the things I wasn't allowed to say, the touch I wasn't supposed to give. And then the sound of a car pulling up outside shattered the moment. She jumped slightly, startled, and the space between us widened instantly, like a storm had passed inside the apartment as well as out. The near confession, the almost action, evaporated with the sudden intrusion of reality. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself it was nothing, that nothing had happened, that nothing would happen. But as she glanced at me, caught my eye for the briefest second, there was something unspoken there, something that could have been everything. And I knew, somehow it wasn't gone. The apartment was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your chest. Rain had stopped outside, leaving the streets slick and reflective, but inside, the air was thick with the weight of everything we hadn't said. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, pretending to read a magazine I didn't care about, while she moved around the kitchen, making tea. Every clink of the spoon against the mug echoed too loudly in my ears. She set the mug down and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. For the first time, I noticed the way her jaw was tight, the faint line of tension between her brows. It wasn't just tiredness anymore. There was something unspoken, an undercurrent of questioning. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" she asked suddenly, voice low, almost trembling. I nearly dropped the magazine, startled by the vulnerability in her tone. I looked up, meeting her eyes, and it hit me. She wasn't joking. This wasn't a casual comment or passing thought. She was staring straight at the edges of something neither of us could name, something dangerous and real. I don't know," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sometimes, maybe." I realized how inadequate that sounded, how little it captured the storm inside me every time I was near her. She shifted, letting one hand slide down to the counter, fingertips brushing the wood as if seeking grounding. "Because this isn't normal, right? Us being like this, close, always this." She gestured vaguely, like words couldn't contain the tension. "I don't know. It doesn't feel normal." I swallowed. "No," I admitted softly. "It doesn't." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Her eyes held a question, a challenge, and maybe even a plea for honesty I wasn't sure I was ready to give. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words caught in my throat, heavy and unformed. We sat like that, the silence speaking more than either of us could say. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming that something had shifted irrevocably, that the air between us had changed shape. I could feel the pull of her presence in a way that made me ache, but also terrified me. Finally, she took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, as if exhaling not just air but all the tension she'd been holding in. "I don't know if I'm supposed to feel like this," she whispered, almost to herself. And I realized I wasn't either. I opened my mouth, thinking I could say something, anything to make it less heavy, but the right words didn't exist. I just nodded, letting the quiet stretch, letting the space between us vibrate with all the things we couldn't name. She looked away, tracing the rim of her mug with a finger, eyes distant. I'm scared," she said finally, and it landed like a stone in my chest. I didn't move. I didn't reach out. I couldn't. I just watched, feeling the raw weight of her words settle between us, impossible to ignore, impossible to fix. And in that moment, I understood. Everything had changed, and nothing would ever be the same. I found her sitting at the small desk by the window, the city lights stretching into the distance like scattered fireflies. A photo lay in front of her, old and creased at the edges, the kind of thing you almost forget exists until it hits you in a corner of your chest you didn't know was tender. She traced her finger over the image, and I could see her shoulders trembling slightly, though she didn't say anything at first. The quiet between us was familiar now, but tonight it felt heavier, like it had gathered weight in anticipation. "I didn't want anyone to see this," she said finally, voice low, almost brittle. She didn't look at me, eyes fixed on the photograph as if it could anchor her. "It's him." I swallowed, unsure whether to speak. "Him." She nodded, exhaling sharply, a mixture of nostalgia and pain. "My first love. My husband long ago. It didn't end well." Her hand hovered over the photo, trembling, before she pulled it closer to her chest. I wanted to say something comforting, something to bridge the gap between past and present, but all I managed was a quiet, "I see." She glanced at me then, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her composed exterior. It's stupid, maybe. I don't cry over him, not really, but sometimes I still feel the echo, you know? I nodded slowly, feeling the pulse of connection, fragile but real. I thought of my own ghosts, the things I carried silently. I get that. I've had those echoes too. For a moment, we just sat, the hum of the city and the faint buzz of the streetlights outside filling the space between us. I noticed the way her fingers lingered on the photo, the gentle curve of her back, the slight slump of her shoulders that made her human, fallible, beautiful in a way I hadn't dared to name. Then she laughed softly, almost bitterly. I shouldn't be sitting here, remembering him. It's ridiculous at my age. It's not ridiculous, I said, though my voice was barely above a whisper. It matters. Those things matter. She looked at me then, really looked, eyes searching, perhaps for understanding, perhaps for permission to feel what she felt. I realized, suddenly, that her past heartbreak wasn't a wall between us. It was a window, a glimpse of something raw and real, a softness I hadn't seen before. The air felt electric, not in a sudden spark, but in the subtle charge of two people acknowledging the fragility of their own hearts. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that the ache she carried could, somehow, be shared. But I didn't. I just moved a little closer, careful not to overstep, and let the quiet hold us. Her breath hitched softly, almost imperceptibly, and the photo slipped from her fingers to the desk. I caught it reflexively, holding it for a second, and our fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. She just stayed. I looked down at her, at the photo, at the small, trembling line of her mouth, and felt a strange, gentle seismic shift in my chest. Something had changed, something subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. And I knew, in that quiet, that the distance between us had shifted too. We didn't speak for a long time after the photo incident. The city outside had softened into a quiet drizzle, the kind that makes the world feel smaller, more intimate. I sat on the couch, and she stayed by the window, knees drawn up, shoulders relaxed in a way that suggested she was letting herself exist without pretense. I finally broke the silence, careful not to force it. You okay? She glanced at me, and I noticed the trace of a smile in the corners of her lips, subtle, almost shy. Yeah, she said, voice soft. I think. I'm learning to be. There was something in that, a quiet admission of self-acceptance, and I realized that whatever tension had been holding us back wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition, mutual understanding that the space between us could be something, quietly, carefully, without demands or rush. I moved closer, letting the couch cushions creak under me, and she didn't flinch. The distance felt right, just small enough to respect, just close enough to feel inevitable. My hand brushed hers as I shifted, and for a moment, neither of us pulled away. Not that we had to speak. The brush alone said everything. Her fingers lingered on mine, tentative, testing the boundaries, and I responded with the gentlest pressure. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't fireworks. It was acknowledgement. A quiet agreement that we were here, together, and that this, whatever this was real and wanted by both of us. We didn't need words. The air between us hummed with unspoken understanding. I noticed her hair falling loosely around her face, the way her eyes softened when she caught mine, the tiny rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. I felt the same rhythm mirrored in me, as if the apartment itself had adjusted to hold the two of us in this quiet orbit. At some point, she leaned slightly toward me, just enough for our foreheads to brush. I didn't push or pull. We stayed that way, suspended in the gentle gravity of proximity. Time didn't matter, nor did the storm outside. I let my thumb trace the back of her hand. She didn't move away. The simplest contact carried the weight of every moment we hadn't spoken, every tension we'd held, every almost action that had hovered between us. It was delicate, fragile, and entirely real. I don't want this to end, she murmured, almost to herself. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just squeezed her hand lightly, a soft affirmation that mirrored her own unspoken truth. And for the first time, I understood that some things didn't need words to be undeniable. Some truths existed in presence, in attention, in the quiet permission to be close without forcing anything more than what felt earned. We stayed like that until the drizzle outside became a soft mist, the apartment filled with the faint scent of rain and coffee, and something ineffable between us. And I realized, in that small, perfect suspension, that this gentle, careful closeness was enough. Enough to hold on to, enough to build from, enough to finally breathe. It's been weeks since that night, the one where everything shifted without a word. I still remember the weight of her hand in mine, the soft press of her forehead against mine, and how nothing else in the world seemed to exist in that moment except the quiet understanding that had finally settled between us. Living in the apartment since then feels different, not because anything exploded or changed dramatically, but because the air itself carries a new texture. She moves through the space with that same calm confidence, yet now there's a softness around her that wasn't there before, a willingness to let herself be seen without armor. And I've learned to be present without expectation, to notice her without wanting to cross boundaries, to hold a space for someone without trying to fill it with words I don't have. We laugh more easily now, share small rituals, a cup of tea in the morning, a brush of hands over the counter, the subtle exchange of glances that says everything without a single syllable. And yet, there's still tension, still the unspoken electricity that makes me pause every time she tilts her head at me, or the quiet ache when she sighs softly beside me. It's no longer forbidden or scary, it's just alive. I've realized something important. Love doesn't always need fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it exists in the small spaces between people, in the quiet, earned moments of connection, in the acknowledgement that someone else sees you fully and still chooses to stay. That's what has changed in us. That's what I carry with me every day. And she carries the past differently now. The photo, the echoes, the ghosts of heartbreak, they're still there, of course. But she holds them lightly, letting them be part of who she is without letting them dictate the rhythm of what we have together. I sit here sometimes, on the couch, looking at her reading by the window, and I feel a gentle warmth that isn't desperate or urgent. It's steady, real, and completely ours. It's the kind of connection that lingers in the chest long after the moment has passed, the kind that makes even silence feel full. I suppose that's what we've learned, that closeness, when it's patient and respectful, can be more powerful than any shouted confession. That noticing someone, truly noticing, is a kind of intimacy in itself. And that sometimes love's quietest moments are its most unforgettable. So here we are, navigating the ordinary together, carrying the extraordinary quietly between us. I don't know what the future holds, and maybe that's the beauty of it. For now, this is enough. And if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?